That Truth Social post
Yep.
from this morning. Um, Read it and then tell me what your reaction is to it.
A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again.
I'd honestly say this is just like disgusting.
It sounds like typical Trump.
The first sentence, a whole civilization will die tonight. I take that as that there's going to be a lot of loss of life. So I think right off rip with that first sentence, I don't necessarily agree with what Trump's saying.
It's ridiculous, beyond ridiculous. If I swore, I'd tell you what I really think.
And then you continue to read, it kind of looks like he takes back what he's saying, that there's going to be a regime change, and that I take that as a lot of people won't die, but I'd say it's extreme, especially from the president, to be saying something like that.
I cannot believe that this is our world. I can't believe that our president of the United States believes he's some sort of supreme leader.
We will find out tonight one of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end. God bless the great people of Iran.
You saw right there, he said, it's the end of civilization. What do you think happens at 8 p.m. tonight?
I'm hoping it's just talk and nothing happens. But if it does happen, shame on us, shame on him.
I think it's actually rather terrifying. I mean, I would hate to think that we could start World War III, but I don't put it beyond the capabilities of him.
I have no idea, if I'm being completely honest. I hope that whatever does take place, it's for the best for the most amount of people.
So let's be real for a second. If you were just scrolling through social media or watching the news earlier today, you probably thought we were hours away from the United States wiping an entire country off the map. That's the level things got pushed to, and it all came from one post. One statement from President Trump on Truth Social where he said a whole civilization will die tonight. Now, when people hear something like that, especially out of context, yes, it sounds extreme. It sounds serious, but here's where things start to not add up. Because if you've been paying attention at all over the last several years, you already know this is how Trump negotiates. He doesn't start in the middle, he doesn't ease into it. He goes straight to the maximum pressure point right out the gate. Think about it like this. If you're negotiating anything in real life, whether it's buying a car, talking salary, or even dealing with a contractor, you don't walk in offering your final number. You start high, you start strong, and then you work your way toward the deal. That's basic negotiation. Now take that same idea and apply it to global politics, to military pressure, to hostile regimes. That max position becomes something like, we can end this completely if you don't come to the table. That doesn't mean that's the plan. It means that's the leverage. But instead of explaining it that way, what do we get? We got panic. We got headlines. We got people on TV acting like the decision had already been made and planes were already in the air. You had commentators immediately jumping to words like genocide and war crimes. So now let's read the statement from President Trump and break it down. A whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. I don't want that to happen, but it probably will. However, now that we have complete and total regime change, where different, smarter, and less radicalized minds prevail, maybe something revolutionary, wonderful can happen. Who knows? We will find out tonight. One of the most important moments in the long and complex history of the world. 47 years of extortion, corruption, and death will finally end. God bless the great people of Iran. Now, you see that, right? And then you have Piers Morgan. This is a brazen pre-admission of genocide against the Iranian people, which would obviously be a war crime. Madness. Then you have Crystal Ball. Our president is promising civilization in the war crimes. How can anyone pretend we are the good guys at this point? This is the panic, right? Piers Morgan calling it a brazen pre-mission of genocide. Others saying, how can we pretend we are the good guys? And it's like, hold on. Think about what's actually being said here versus how it's being interpreted. Because from my perspective, what we're watching isn't a real-time march toward war. It's a complete misunderstanding or maybe a deliberate misrepresentation of how negotiation at that level actually works. And this is where it gets frustrating for a lot of people watching this play out in real time, because you're seeing two completely different realities. On one side is saying this is strategic pressure. This is how you force movement without firing a shot. On the other side is saying this is the end. This is a war crime. This is madness. Those are not small differences. That's a completely different way of looking at the same exact situation. And when you step back and look at it, you have to ask yourself, are people actually confused about this, or are they choosing to frame it this way because it fits a narrative? Because again, this isn't new. We saw the same exact approach with tariffs, where the starting point was extreme 200% tariffs, essentially cutting off trade. And then what happens? Negotiations, movement, deals. That's the pattern. But in this case, instead of acknowledging that pattern, the reaction was immediate fear, immediate outrage. And honestly, it feels less like analysis and more like performance. Like people already decided what this meant before anything even happened. And that's the part that should make you stop and think, because when the reaction is that fast and that extreme, it usually means something deeper is going on in how the story is being told. Hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and check this out.
About 4.5 hours away now from President Trump's 8 p.m. deadline Eastern time for Iran. Democrats accusing the president of committing a war crime if he goes through with this threat. Here are some examples of that.
We have a completely unhinged president who is threatening massive war crimes.
The clear answer is yes. It would be a war crime.
Pure evil and insanity. Some sort of like homicidal psychopath.
Is the end game really to blow up all of Iran and actually commit war crimes?
That is California Democrat Congressman Ro Khanna, of course, who joins me now. He serves on the House Oversight and Armed Services Committees. Congressman, good to have you here. Thank you very much. So as we get closer to this deadline and, you hear the pushback and you're part of it there, I guess, I would just ask you where the war crime is and whether or not you think that Iran has been guilty of war crimes, killing almost 40,000 of their own people, gunning them down in the street.
Martha, obviously Iran is guilty of war crimes, but America is different. We don't go threatening genocide. We don't threaten to wipe civilizations off the face of the earth. That is what makes America different. The president doing this is destroying everything this country stands for. We're the good guys. We're the ones who defeated tyranny.
Let me ask you this. So, we've all been watching President Trump for a long time. Is that really what you see here? Or do you see this as a way to get Iran to open up the strait, to come to negotiations, and hopefully to have new leadership that won't oppress its people, new leadership that won't make children and women line up around energy sites, which is a Geneva Convention violation? I think we need to look at the history of the way that President Trump negotiates these things and to see that, unless you're very clear and you have a serious stick that you're holding over this situation, you're not likely to get anywhere.
Martha, you don't have to threaten genocide to get Iran to open up the Strait of Hormuz. We've lost the plot here. The president has lost the plot. The president went in to say that he wanted to free the Iranian people. Now he's talking about destroying 90 million people.
I was speaking with Nazimonian, and I've spoken with a lot of Iranian activists who want this.
They want him to threaten to wipe out 91 million people?
I think they understand what I don't think anyone's talking about
this. Is not a New York real estate deal. He's the president of the United States.
Yeah.
The commander-in-chief was saying we're going to kill 91 million.
I guess the question is, what do you suggest?
I'll tell you what we can do to end the war.
Let me just clarify my question. So this is a leadership that has killed 1,500 American soldiers, maimed 4,500. They have, through proxies,
they're an evil regime. You're not
carried off October 7th, the Beirut Marine barracks bombing.
Yes, they're horrible.
At what point? So you really think that they're going to suddenly decide to give these things up if they are not threatened with actual consequences?
Yeah, so let's break this down in plain English, because this is where the gap between what's being said and what's actually happening really starts to show. You got people, especially on the left, acting like this was some random reckless threat with no strategy behind it. And from my perspective, that only makes sense if you don't understand how Trump operates at all. Because if you watch them for any amount of time, whether it's business, trade, or foreign policy, you already know the pattern, family. You already know the pattern, and that's just the facts of it. Now, knowing the pattern and how Trump operates, he starts at the absolute maximum pressure point, not halfway, not soft, maximum. And then he uses that pressure to force a response. That's exactly what this looks like, because what happened after all that panic, after all the war crime talk, after everyone said we were on the brink of disaster, a 2-week ceasefire. That's what actually came out of it. A pause, negotiation, movement, and not just that. Part of the discussion now includes reopening the Strait of Hormuz, which is a major global shipping route. Think about what that means in real life. That's oil moving. That's global trade flowing. That's gas prices, supply chains, everyday cost that affect regular people. This isn't some abstract foreign policy debate. This touches real things in people's lives. And according to the statement, this came out after conversations involving Pakistan's leadership, asking the U.S. to hold off on military action, with the condition being that Iran agrees to reopen the route safely and immediately. So let's read it. It says, major break-in. President Trump announces a 2-week ceasefire with Iran, which will include the complete reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Based on conversations with Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Field Marshal Hassan Minar of Pakistan, and where they requested that I hold off the destructive force being sent tonight to Iran is subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran agreeing to the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz. I agree to suspend the bombing and attack of Iran for a period of 2 weeks. This would be a double-sided ceasefire. The reason for doing so is that we have already met and exceeded all military objectives and are very far along with a definite agreement concerning long-term peace with Iran and peace in the Middle East. We received a 10-point proposal from Iran and believe it is a workable basis on which to negotiate. Almost all of the various points of past contention have been agreed to between the United States and Iran, but a 2-week period will allow the agreement to be finalized and consummated. On behalf of the United States of America, as president and also representing the countries of the Middle East, it is an honor to have this long-term problem close to resolution. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. Right? And then you have it. A statement on behalf of the Supreme National Security Council of Islamic Republic of Iran. On behalf of Islamic Republic of Iran, I express gratitude and appreciation for my dear brothers, he Prime Minister of Pakistan Sharif and he Field Marshal Minar, for their tireless efforts to end the war in the region. In response to the brotherly request of Prime Minister Sharif in his tweet, and considering the request by the U.S. for negotiation based on its 15-point proposal, as well as announcement by POTUS about acceptance of the general framework of Iran's 10-point proposal as a basis for negotiations, I hereby declare on behalf of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, if attacks against Iran are halted, our powerful armed forces will cease their defensive operations. For a period of 2 weeks, safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz will be possible via coordination with Iran's armed forces and with due consideration of technical limitations. So there you have it, guys. So now, think about the sequence here. You start with maximum pressure, language that sounds extreme, sure. But then what do you get? You get other countries stepping in. You get negotiations happening fast. You get conditions being discussed. That's not chaos. That's leverage doing what it's designed to do. Now compare that to how it was being framed earlier. People were told this was leading straight to destruction, that this was irrational, that this was dangerous beyond control. But in reality, what we're seeing is a pause and a potential agreement forming around something that actually matters globally. And this is where it doesn't add up if you're just taking a panic at face value. Because if the goal was immediate destruction, none of this would be happening. There wouldn't be a ceasefire. There wouldn't be conditions. There wouldn't be negotiations through other countries. It would already been done. But that's not what happened. What happened is exactly what tends to happen when you apply overwhelming pressure at the start. You force everyone to take the situation seriously, and then you create space to negotiate from a position of strength. And again, you don't have to like the tone of it. You don't have to agree with how aggressive it sounds. That's a fair discussion to have. But saying there's no strategy here or acting like this is just random or unhinged doesn't line up with what we're actually seeing play out in real time. Because in the real world, Outcomes matter more than headlines. And right now, the outcome is not what people were told to expect hours ago or just 24 hours ago.
Truth Social from the White House saying this: based on conversations with Prime Minister Sharif and Field Marshal Munir of Pakistan, and wherein they requested that I hold off the destructive force being sent tonight to Iran and subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran, agreeing to the complete, immediate, and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz, I agree to suspend the bombing and attack of Iran for a period of 2 weeks. This will be a double-sided ceasefire. The reason for doing so is that we have already met and exceeded all military objectives and are very far along with a definitive agreement concerning long-term peace with Iran and peace in the Middle East. We received a 10-point proposal from Iran and believe it is a workable basis on which to negotiate. Almost all of the various points of past contention have been agreed to between the United States and Iran, but a 2-week period will allow the agreement to be finalized and consummated. On behalf of the United States of America as president and also representing the countries of the Middle East, it is an honor to have this long-term problem close to resolution. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. Again, just seconds ago, before the deadline for attacks on Iran tonight, and it seems like a deal is in the making. There had been talk, Mark, all day long about maybe this was happening. How do you see this? And how?
Yeah, so now that you heard all of that, let's slow this down and walk through what actually just happened. Because this is where the real picture starts to come together. Before that deadline, everyone was panicking about Pakistan. Pakistan steps in and says, basically, hold on. Can we pause this for 2 weeks and try to work something out? That's a real world example of how this stuff actually plays out. Other countries get involved because nobody wants escalation. So they reach out, they try to mediate, they try to create space, and the White House response at the time was simple. We'll see. Not a yes, not a no. Just holding that pressure in place. Then what happens next? Trump announces a ceasefire, the same type of pause that was being requested, and right after that, Iran responds and says, in other words, if attacks stop, they'll stop their operations too. Now, think about what that means in plain terms. Both sides are stepping back at the same time. That's not random. That's not chaotic. That's coordinated movement, even if it's indirect. And part of that includes reopening the Strait of Hormuz, or at least allowing safe passage again, which, like we talked about, affects global trade, energy, and everyday costs. Now, here's where it gets interesting, because depending on where you're getting your news, you're already being told 2 completely different stories about the same exact outcome. On one side, you got people saying Trump caved, that he backed down, that the pressure didn't work. On the other side, you got people saying Iran is the one that folded, that they came to the table because of that pressure. So which one is it? Because both can be true at the same time. From my perspective, this is where you have to step back from the labels and just look at what actually changed. Before the pressure, there was no pause, no agreement, no movement on the strait. After the pressure, suddenly there's a ceasefire. There are negotiations, and there's at least a framework being discussed. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. That happens because something forced the situation to move. Now, to be fair, Iran is framing this as a defensive posture. They're saying we'll stop if attacks stop, and they're positioning themselves as responding, not reacting. That's expected. Every country is going to frame things in a way that makes them look reasonable to their own people and to the world. That's just reality. But at the same time, you have to look at what they're agreeing to do, right? And when looking at what they're agreeing to do and breaking that all the way down, allowing passage through a critical waterway, engaging in negotiations frameworks, coordinating terms, those are not the actions of a situation that's spiraling out of control. Those are the actions of a situation that's being pulled back from the edge. And this is where understanding the bigger picture matters, especially when you think about how the Constitution sets up foreign policy. The president, as commander in chief, is given the authority to act quickly in situations like this, to apply pressure, to respond to threats, and ideally to prevent full-scale conflict before it starts. The founders understood that you can't run foreign policy by committee in moments like this. There has to be the ability to act decisively. And part of that, whether people like it or not, includes using strong language and strong positioning to create deterrence. That idea, peace through strength, isn't new. We've seen it during the Cold War, where the goal wasn't to start conflict, but to make the cost of conflict so high that the other side chooses not to engage. Same thing with North Korea in recent years. Maximum pressure, strong rhetoric, then negotiations. Now, that doesn't mean there's zero risk. It's fair for people to say, hey, this kind of language can escalate things if it's misread. That's a reasonable concern. But there's a difference between acknowledging risk and ignoring results. Because what we're looking at right now is not escalation, it's de-escalation after pressure was applied. And calling that caving without acknowledging a sequence of events just doesn't line up with what actually happened. It skips over the part where the pressure came first and the movement came after. And that's the part that actually matters if you're trying to understand how this works in the real world. So let's walk through, if you walk through this, right? And this is the 10-point plan. Guarantee that Iran will not be attacked again. Permanent end to the war, not just ceasefire. End to Israeli strikes in Lebanon, lifting all U.S. sanctions on Iran. End to all regional fighting against Iran allies. In return, Iran will open up the Strait. Iran would impose a Hormuz fee of $2 million per ship. Iran would split these fees with Oman. Iran to provide rules for safe passage through Hormuz. All right. President Trump's deadline for a peace deal with Iran. That was the other day, right? Obviously, we already got a ceasefire. So the peace deal is in negotiations. So when you look at all of this, I want to actually walk through this last part carefully, because this is where this is crude oil, right? This is where a lot of people either get confused or get misled depending on what they're watching. First off, the oil point. We need to clean that up. Oil is not crashing right now. If you actually look at the chart, crude is sitting around the mid 70s and is actually slightly up on the day. What that tells you is simple. The market is not in panic mode. If traders really believe the Strait of Hormuz was about to stay shut down or things were about to spiral out of control, you wouldn't see oil sitting calm. You'll see it spike hard, like think $90 to $100 plus. That's what fears looks like in the real world. So what we're actually seeing is the opposite. The market is reacting to the idea that things might stabilize, not collapse. That's important, because this is where real world impact shows up. When oil spikes, you feel it at the gas pump. You feel it in shipping costs. You feel it in groceries. So when prices stay steady, that's a signal that the situation is cooling off, at least for now. Now, let's talk about the bigger picture here, because you're hearing two completely different narratives again. One side is saying Trump cave, and I want to actually play that for you in regards to that matter.
Baron Burnett, and out front tonight, we have this breaking news just coming in, as I said, literally at the 11th hour, Trump backing down after threatening that a, quote, whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. Horrific and unacceptable words, which just moments ago at the 11th hour before his deadline, Trump now has essentially rescinded, obviously not deleting the post, but changing the outlook, saying subject to the Islamic Republic of Iran agreeing to the complete, immediate and safe opening of the Strait of Hormuz, I agreed to suspend the bombing and attack of Iran for a period of 2 weeks. This will be a double-sided ceasefire.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the weeknight. I'm Simone Sanders-Townsend with Eugene Daniels and Jackie Alamani in for Alicia and Michael. Let's get right to tonight's breaking news. Donald Trump just caved, backing down from his fake deadline, averting for now what the president described this morning as an attack on Iran that would lead to the death of a, quote, whole civilization. Moments ago, the president posted, quote, I agree to suspend the bombing and attack of Iran for a period of 2 weeks. The suspension is contingent on Iran reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Now, Trump says he backed down based on talks with Pakistan, which is serving as an intermediary. He added, quote, we received a 10-point proposal from Iran and believe it is a workable basis on which to negotiate.
And I just got off the phone with President Trump. And I will say this, we'll read the whole post later. I literally just had to rewrite the whole show. He was extremely serious in my conversation with him just now. And he was also cautiously but seriously optimistic. He told me that the negotiations are and were incredibly complex. He does not want them jeopardized. There still needs to be an announced agreement. And of course, we all know in this part of the world, anything can happen. But it sure looks like Iran blinked.
So now you guys see the two different narratives that I was telling you. One side say Trump is caving, the other side saying obviously Iran blinked, meaning Iran actually knew what it was and stopped playing around with Trump because he's not playing around. So the point that I'm making is the sides that saying Trump caved, mainstream level media, CNN, MS Now. The other side is saying Trump folded, Fox News, so forth. And like I said before, the truth is usually somewhere in the middle. But you have to look at leverage to understand who actually gained ground. From my perspective, the situation put Trump in a tough spot politically, not militarily. Militarily, the US is not on the back foot here. That's just not reality. The real pressure is domestic markets, public perception, upcoming elections like the midterms, all of that. And this is where the ceasefire actually matters. It buys time, and that's what this looks like in real life. It gives space for things to cool down, for negotiations to continue, and for strategy to adjust. Now, I'm going to clean up another part when it comes to a commentary that been happening because it matters for credibility. Saying Iran got nothing out of this isn't accurate. They did get something. They got a pause in potential escalation. That's not nothing. At the same time, it's also true they didn't get the big ticket items they reportedly were pushing for, like immediate sanction relief or long-term guarantees. So the more honest way to say it is this: both sides step back without getting everything they wanted. That's what a ceasefire is. It's not a final deal. It's a timeout. Think about it like two people in a heated argument who both agree to step away before it gets worse. Nobody won in that moment, but both avoided making it worse. That's what we're looking at. Now, when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, this is the key leverage point. No question. Roughly a fifth of the world's oil moves through that area. So when Iran threatens it or restricts it, that hits global markets, especially allies in Europe and Asia. Us in America, United States of America, we don't need it. We have our own oil. We don't touch none of that oil. We don't need it. And when you look at it, right, this doesn't hit the US the same way it hits others because we produce a lot of our own energy in our own oil. And that part is true. But it still affects global pricing, which circles back to Americans. Now, here's where you got to get to the bigger picture here and what actually holds up the bigger point. If Iran steps back from using that leverage, even temporarily, they are giving up pressure in the short term. And that does matter in negotiations, but we also have to be honest about uncertainty here. We don't know fully which parts of these proposals are finalized, which are still being negotiated, which are just positioning. That's how these situations work. There's a lot happening behind the scenes, right?
And then, of course, Max, then you get to the practicality of people that will live in the moment. That's what the markets do. So the markets, of course, right now in futures trading, they have gone up. Because guess what? Trump is backed off. And there will be some who will call it, taco. Right? Trump always chickens out, which is making way too light of it. But it is also a truth, which is that he makes giant threats that he does not follow through on. Yeah. So it's one thing for everyone to say, well, nobody wanted him to do this. And it's another to say that the word of the President of the United States is now something that people do not think that they can take at his word, that they expect it to be just a quick trading opportunity every single time. And
are saying that oil tankers passing through the strait have been stopped because of Israel's ceasefire breach. So you have that going on. And there's a report out there that says that the president might not send J.D. Vance to Pakistan for the meeting in Islamabad on Friday.
Might be a little soon for that.
Yeah, we're just kind of like piecing this together right now. Some of this could play out the way we're saying it, and some of it may not. I think it's tenuous at the moment, and we've said it many times that ceasefires in the Middle East are tricky things. I experienced one about 20 years ago. It was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. Israel and Hezbollah had been going at it for 2 months, every single day, 24 hours a day. They set a deadline for 8 o'clock in the morning. We crawl out of bed. We walk outside on the deck of our hotel. We wait for the countdown. It's 7:50 in the morning. As soon as 8 o'clock ticks, silence everywhere.
So the next day, April 8th, which is Wednesday, which is today recording of this video, yesterday, which was April 7th, when the ceasefire took place, which was before the deadline when Trump promised a Tuesday 8 p.m. bombing. The simple fact is, family, that Iran basically halted ships at the Strait after there was a ceasefire of saying they will open up the Strait, right? That was part of the ceasefire of basically individuals not imposing any type of military force, drawing back, but allowing the Strait to open up for passage for other countries. Now that it's at a halt, this is why I say that these situations, right, are fragile and they're still in the works. And let's talk about the escalation part, because this is where things could get unrealistic if we're not careful. The idea that U.S. would just take over the Strait or seize territory outright, that's not how this typically plays out in the real world. That would be a massive escalation with global consequences, not just for Iran, but involving other major powers. So a more grounded way to explain this is if Iran were to shut the Strait again, which happens to happen today in some way, shape, or form, the likely response will be focused on securing shipping lanes and neutralizing threats, not outright occupation. But, like I said, it's still in the framework. Limited passage is taking place when it comes to Iran being very considerate and being very selective of what's allowed while they're still controlling the Strait. And I want to prove to you that the framework, let alone negotiations, is still in the works. Because if you look at this, Trump dropped today that Iran may launch a joint venture to charge tolls in the Strait of Hormuz. After weeks of tension, Trump revealed a potential deal where both sides could profit, the United States and Iran, from the secure shipping lanes. This could flip the entire dynamic in the region, right? So apparently Israel fired at Iran, which made Iran shut down the Strait. Now, that's not our fault or anything that we done within the U.S. because we obviously reached a ceasefire deal. But like I said, negotiation is still fragile, and there's a difference, right? There's a difference, and that difference matters because about leverage going forward. If Iran re-escalates after agreeing to a pause, they risk losing international support and putting themselves in a weaker position diplomatically. That's real because countries like China, who rely heavily on stable energy flows and rely heavily on the Strait, don't want disruption there. So there is pressure on multiple sides to keep things stable from Iran. And this is why, from my perspective, there is a real chance for some kind of deal here. Not because everything is suddenly resolved, but because both sides have reasons to avoid things getting worse. The U.S. has political economic incentives to stabilize. Like we have we are full-fledged with the intention to stabilize the Strait and stabilize the situation with Iran. Iran has economic and regional pressure to do the same from China, their allies, our adversary. That's usually where negotiations negotiations happen, not when things are calm, right? When both sides realize escalation caused more than compromise. More so like we're better together than apart, and it's only going to hurt each other. And you want to see my point that is going to cause problems from Iran because China actually forced and pressured Iran to negotiate to get this ceasefire deal done with President Trump. So as you guys read, New York Times, Iran had accepted Pakistan's 2-week truce proposal, faced pressure from China to do so. Pakistan obviously is the individual that's the mediator between the United States and Iran. But following U.S. President Trump's announcement, the New York Times quotes 3 Iranian officials say that Tehran has accepted Pakistan's proposal for a 2-week ceasefire in the U.S.-Israel war with Iran. The report says that alongside Pakistan's push for a ceasefire, China intervened at the last minute to show flexibility and diffuse tensions, while also noticing concerns about the economic fallout if Trump went ahead with these threats of U.S. strikes on Iranian energy sites and key infrastructure. Key infrastructure for China. You get where I'm going with this? So that's what I mean. This isn't over. It's not even closed. This is a pause, not a resolution. And yeah, politically, Trump is in that position where no matter what he does, someone's going to say he did it wrong. If he applies pressure, they say it's reckless. If he pulls back, they say he's weak. He's taco, right? Whatever that means. You get my point. But he caved in. But if you strip all that away and just look at what's actually happening in the real world, pressure, response, pause, negotiation, it starts to make a lot more sense than headlines make it seem, right? And this is where all comes together. So let's just talk about it straight. No matter what Trump does in a situation like this, people are going to criticize it. If he applies pressure, he's reckless. If he pulls back, he's weak. My point. That's what I mean when I say it's just a no-win situation politically, is what I'm saying. But here's the thing. Go back to what actually matters. Outcomes, not headlines, not reactions, not emotional takes, just results. And from my perspective, the most straightforward, least messy outcome here is a deal. That's the goal. That's always been the goal. You apply pressure to get a deal, and right now it looks like Iran has a real incentive to come to the table. Not because they suddenly agree with us, but because the pressure is real and the risks are real. And yeah, countries like China play a role in that, as you guys can see, I just read. Think about that in simple terms. China depends heavily on stable energy flow. They don't want disruption in a critical route like the Strait of Hormuz. So if things start getting unstable, they have every reason to push Iran towards some kind of agreement. That's how global pressure works. It's not just one country. It's multiple interests are pushing towards stability because instability costs everyone money. Now, I want to clean up this, right? While keeping the core point intact. The idea this is purely Iran folding is a little too clean. What this actually looks like is both sides stepping back under pressure and try to figure out what a line is. Iran still has leverage long term, and the US still has leverage. What matters is who uses it more effectively over time. That said, my point still stands. Agreeing to a pause and easing pressure on the Strait, even temporarily, does reduce Iran's immediate leverage. That's real, and it gives the US and its allies time to regroup, adjust, and prepare for whatever comes next. Because we don't know what Iran, we don't know what with these individuals when it comes to the Middle East. That's a strategic advantage, even if it's temporary, from the US. Now, let's talk about what winning actually looks like here. Because this is where people get it wrong. Winning is not just escalation for the sake of it. Winning is not endless conflict. Winning is getting to an outcome that protects U.S. interests, stabilizes the situation, and avoids dragging things out longer than necessary. If Trump walks away with a deal that improves security, keeps trade flowing, and puts the U.S. in a stronger position, then yeah, that's a win. Plain and simple. On the flip side, where things actually go wrong is if there's no deal and no follow through. That's the real risk, because when you applied pressure, raised expectations, and ended up with nothing to show for it, that's where credibility takes a hit. So for the next couple of weeks matter. That's the window. That's where we find out if this turns into something real or if it falls apart. Now, and as for the idea that Iran can flip a switch and go right back to shutting down the Strait without consequences, it's not that simple. Once you step back and signal openness to negotiation, if you suddenly reverse course, you risk isolating yourself even more. Other countries start to see you as the problem, and that changes the dynamic. And that's why these decisions aren't just militarily. They're political, economic, and global all at the same time. And this is where I want people to take away from all of this. Don't get caught up on the noise. Don't get pulled into every emotional headline or every hot take on social media. Look at the sequence. Pressure, response, pause, negotiation. That's the pattern. That's how this stuff actually works in the real world. It's not clean, it's not perfect, and it's definitely not instant, but it's a process. And right now, we're in the middle of it, not at the end. So we'll see how it plays out. But if you just step back and look at what's actually happening instead of what people are saying is happening, it starts to make a lot more sense. And I want to break this all down simple so nobody's confused. Oil runs the world, and a huge amount of it moves through the Strait of Hormuz. So when that gets threatened or shut down, like what's happening right now with Iran and the whole world panics because supply might get cut. That's why oil prices go up and gas prices go up. Two, even though the U.S. has its own oil, oil is sold on a global market based on global price. So U.S. companies sell at the world price, even though we have our own oil here in the U.S. And I'll tell you why. Because if we sold it cheaper here, the US, if we sold it cheaper, other countries or traders would just buy our oil and flip it overseas for more profit. So they'll charge more than what we selling for cheaper, draining our supply and hurting our companies, and we're losing profits in our economy, let alone the US. Now, here's where the power comes in. Countries like China need that oil, like I've been saying, more than we do from the Strait and in Iran. And oil is bought in US dollars. So when things get dangerous, like the Iran situation, countries rush to get dollars and move their money into America because it's the safest place. Buying US bonds and investing in America, right? And that demand makes the US dollar stronger. And because everyone wants it, and they're converting their dollars into American dollars, and that brings money into the U.S. economy, helping business grow, keeping interest rate lower. Because if an individual like another country is putting their money, if they're converting their money to from their dollar to U.S. dollars and putting it in, let's say, a U.S. Treasury bond, was just a loan, was just money that you're lending to the government, and they plan to pay you that original amount back or more plus interest. When a company in the U.S. go to buy a loan, they have it at a lower rate because we have so many people converting their dollars in the outside country wanting to buy oil or park their money in the U.S. to keep it safe, whether that's real estate, whether that's U.S. stocks, whether that's U.S. Treasury bonds, like I'm using for example, which then translates to loans for our companies to buy in the U.S. for cheaper with lower interest. Because the loan that the U.S. Treasury bonds, the money that they're parking to keep their money safe due to their instability in their country with their oil, that means we borrow a loan from the bank. They gave the bank money for a U.S. Treasury bond, which is giving the money, government money for a loan, and then it makes our companies expand. And then they still have their money because we're paying the loan back as our companies thrive and expand, pumping back into our economy as they park our money over here for safety in the US, right? So it keeps borrowing cheaper and it supports jobs in energy and manufacturing and shipping and defense, right? Us using our military defense and our resources to defend the scrape to keep it stabilized so there's no fighting, right? So because more money and demand is flowing into American industries, now with this breaking situation, like I just showed you guys, with the tanker traffic being halted again, after Iran accused Israel of violating the ceasefire, not the United States, Israel, which shows the deal was already fragile. Like I mentioned, oil flow is limited, controlled, and could shut down at any minute. Now that risk is back. That means global supply fear goes right back up. Oil prices react immediately. That's why you seen I showed you guys the crude oil stock going up, the price going up. Now that risk is back. That means global supply fear goes right back up. Oil prices react immediately, and the whole world feels it. With our gas going up in the U.S. because we have to charge the global market price for bidders who want to buy our oil because they feel limited. China, whatever the case may be, feel limited because they can't use the Strait right now. But this is exactly why U.S. control matters when it comes to stabilizing the Strait. And it comes back to this great idea that Trump is negotiating as a businessman to have a joint venture with tolls on the Strait because we play a part in stabilizing the Strait. So Iran can't just cop an attitude and just say, we're shutting it down. Now, we keep the route stable and protected. Oil keeps flowing consistently. Prices stay more predictable and global trade doesn't collapse, which benefits not just America, but the entire world economy. If Iran controlled it alone, they could shut it down whenever they want, as you guys see. They want to gain leverage over money, creating chaos. So the strategy is simple. Pressure Iran, keep the route open under stable leadership, keep oil flowing, keep the dollar strong, keep money coming into America, support jobs here, and keep the global economy from falling apart, while the rest of the world depends on the system we run. We are running it because we're also making sure that Iran don't just shut it down when they have a tantrum, but it's also making sure things run smoothly with our military defense, because Iran don't have military defense. We destroyed it. Let alone we also got rid of their nuclear bombs they were trying to create as they were screaming death to America to try to overthrow us. So not only do we able to keep things smooth, but also we able to also make sure Iran is not enriching themselves to overthrow America, because we running this thing. And if we're going to do a joint venture, we're going to be fair across the board. But let me know what you guys think. I hope you guys got a lot of value from this video. I broke down a lot, but I really wanted to break this down so people truly understand what's going on, because we don't benefit from this when it comes to oil, but we benefit from this from bringing money back to the U.S. and keeping our dollar circulating and keeping our dollar strong. Because if individuals if we don't invest back in America, And we let like Iran enrich themselves to overthrow America. And then they are basically using their monies to partner with China, and they're basically buying guns from each other or whatever the case may be, and they're enriching each other, and nobody is coming to invest in America. It weakens our dollar, is my point, because they're constantly propping themselves up to overthrow us, and we can't have that when it comes to our dollar being weakened and also to go to overthrow us, if that makes sense. Okay. So we also have to realize that we have adversaries always working against us, and we have to stay on top of our game, but also letting us know that we also have to protect the Western Hemisphere. We can't just let them come and run things. So we also use this as leverage over China to park it, because they need oil for their factories and stuff. So we stay in the game. We keep our dollar circulating as strong as our enemies, and we also able to protect ourselves and also continue to invest in our economy as they are. Because if we don't invest in our economy, then we are weakened and they are stronger, and we can't be that. So let me know what you guys think. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. Catch you in the next one. Peace.